Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in his, there's a long title to this, it's the message from the president to the United States transmitting recommendations relative to the strengthening and enforcement of antitrust laws. FDR being the exact opposite of Ronald Reagan, right? Ronald Reagan ended the enforcement of our antitrust laws. Here is the quote from the speech in which FDR announced that he was going to be more aggressively enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act and its subsequent antitrust laws. Quote, "The first truth is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself. That, in essence, is fascism, ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or by any other controlling power." End of quote. And we've got the audio of this kicking around here someplace, and when we track it down, I will play it for you. Then here, this is the other, I was telling you about Henry Wallace, who was FDR's vice president, probably around that time. Henry Wallace was a famous lefty. I mean, you know, he was, in fact, FDR replaced him with Harry Truman because Wallace was starting to draw serious fire from the right. He was such a lefty. But the New York Times, back in early 1944, the New York Times asked Vice President Henry Wallace, quote, "Would you please write a piece answering the following questions? What is a fascist? How many fascists have we? How dangerous are they?" Okay. And here are his answers. Here's what he wrote. This was April 9, 1944, New York Times. This is the height of the war against Germany and Japan. And they're asking him, what is a fascist? How many fascists do we have in the United States? How dangerous are they? Quote, Vice President of the United States, while we're at war with Hitler, quote, "The really dangerous American fascists are not those who are hooked up directly or indirectly with the Axis, with Germany and Japan. The FBI has its finger on those. The dangerous American fascist is the man who wants to do in the United States in an American way what Hitler did in Germany in a Prussian way. The American fascist would prefer not to use violence. His method is to poison the channels of public information. With a fascist, the problem is never best how to present the truth to the public, but how best to use the news to deceive the public into giving the fascist and his group more money or more power." Can you imagine if Joe Biden came out and said this right now? He says, if we define an American fascist as one who, in case of conflict, this is again, Henry Wallace, Vice President of the United States, New York Times, June of 1944. If we define an American fascist as one who, in case of conflict, puts money and power ahead of human beings, there are undoubtedly several million fascists in the United States. There are probably several 100,000 if we narrow the definition to include only those who, in their search for money and power, are ruthless and deceitful. They are patriotic in times of war because it is in their interest to be so. But in time of peace, they follow power and the dollar wherever they may lead. Think of Dick Cheney. He said, fascism is a worldwide disease. The greatest threat to the United States will come after the war and will manifest within the United States itself. He continued, still another danger is represented by those who, paying lip service to democracy and the common welfare, in their insatiable greed for money and power which money gives, who comes to mind when you talk about this, do not hesitate surreptitiously to evade the laws designed to safeguard the public from monopolistic extortion. American fascists of this stamp were clandestinely aligned with their German counterparts before the war and are even now preparing to resume where they left off after the current unpleasantness ceases. He said, some in big business are willing to jeopardize the structure of American liberty to gain some temporary advantage. Monopolists who fear competition and who distrust democracy because it stands for equal opportunity would like to secure their position against small and energetic businesses. In an effort to eliminate the possibility of any rival growing up, some monopolists would sacrifice democracy itself. He goes on to say that the symptoms of fascist thinking are colored by environment and adapted to immediate circumstances, but always and everywhere they can be identified by their appeal to prejudice and by the desire to play upon the fears and vanities of different groups in order to gain power. It is no coincidence that the growth of modern tyrants has in every case been heralded by the growth of prejudice. It may be shocking to some people in this country to realize that without meaning so, they hold views in common with Hitler when they preach discrimination. The American fascists are most easily recognized by their deliberate perversion of truth and fact, Henry Wallace wrote. Their newspapers and propaganda carefully cultivate every fissure of disunity, every crack in the common front against them. They claim to be super patriots, but they would destroy every liberty guaranteed by the Constitution. They demand free enterprise, but they are the spokesman for monopoly and vested interest. Their final objective, toward which all their deceit is directed, is to capture political power so that using the power of the state and the power of the market simultaneously, they may keep the common man in eternal subjection. This is the definition of fascism written in the New York Times in June of 1944 by the sitting Vice President of the United States, Henry Wallace. Tell me it doesn't apply today. And who are the fascists if this is the definition?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
I mean, this is how far we've come in America, that this was the public discourse in 1944, and today we're not even, there's no conversation about any of this in the corporate media.